Welcome, Ray, to our talk about the incredible planetary lineup of spring 2016.
Thank you, Antonia. It's a pleasure to be with you once again.
Okay, let's talk about these very special constellations. Why are they so outstanding?
Well, as important as the short-term planetary combinations have already been this year, they're not as major as the incredible cosmic pattern that's going to unfold between March 23rd and June 17th. And as significant as the changes witnessed in financial markets have been since the beginning of this year, the potential for long-term cycle reversals, they're even greater with the long-term planetary cycles that are going to be present between March and June. And these signatures are not only important in terms of movements in financial markets, but also in terms of world politics and possibly events of nature.
So, what are these major periods you're talking about?
Well, there's three basic ones here. The first involves the second of three passes of the 20-year cycle of Jupiter square to Saturn. The second important period is going to be when Mars and Pluto turn retrograde within 1 day of each other in April. And the third most important thing is that the second passage of three passages of the 36-year cycle of Saturn square Neptune is taking place. So these are very strange and very rare combinations.
Okay, let's start with the next slide and discuss the first of them.
Okay, the first of these geocosmic cycles is the second passage of Jupiter square Saturn on March 23rd. Now, what makes that so pronounced is that 2 days later, on March 25th, Saturn, which is one of the two planets involved, turns retrograde. So it becomes very important that Saturn, that's the most important of the Jupiter square Saturns, that March 23rd to 25th.
Okay. And how would you describe the effects of this aspect?
Well, agreements between world leaders with one another, as well as with their own legislatures or courts, could be severely tested during this time. And we could also see fears of an economic recession returning. Now, since Jupiter and Saturn together rule the law or courts, it's possible that Barack Obama makes his first selection, his proposal to replace Justice Antonin Scalia on the Supreme Court at that time. So it's a big deal in the United States.
But with Venus involved, isn't there some hope?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. The day after Saturn, 2 days after Saturn squares Jupiter and Saturn turns retrograde, Venus it comes to it too. Venus is going to be hitting it into a T-square. So whenever you get Venus and Jupiter together, there's always hope for harmony and partnership. But when Saturn's involved, there can also be disappointment as those hopes turn out to be exaggerated. So what we tend to see is one of the parties in an agreement suddenly back out and they disengage from the agreement. So it's a time of good news regarding potential agreements, followed by not so good news when one of the parties backs out that was supporting the agreement.
Like, when you want to get married and one part steps out in the last moment and says no?
Just like that.
Oh, watch out, people. Okay, and then the next big thing will be Mars turning retrograde.
Yeah, on April 17th and 18th, Mars turns retrograde at 8 degrees of Sagittarius, which is near Saturn. And a day later, Pluto turns retrograde at 17 degrees of Capricorn. And the next 3 days, Venus is going to square Pluto and conjunct Uranus in Aries, which is a sign ruled by Mars.
And do we have to worry about this aspect?
Well, as astrologers, we will, especially Capricorn astrologers like myself.
And myself.
Whenever you find, and you too, whenever Mars and Saturn are together in a fire sign, as they are in this case in Sagittarius, it's a classic signature of war threats. Mars and Pluto turning retrograde together, that can symbolize a time when cruelty and threats to human lives are greater than usual. It can also represent a threatening development in terms of weather or natural phenomena, such as volcanoes, earthquakes, hot spells, or droughts. Things like that can happen with Mars and Pluto go together retrograde.
And would you also think terrorist danger increases?
Well, that's a human-induced quality of Mars and Pluto. Yes, you get increased terrorist acts around that time, and especially since it's in Sagittarius, it seems to be around the area of Israel, the Middle East. So it can be a period when weather turns unseasonably hot, causing concern about the well-being of this year's crop. There can be concerns of droughts, and you could see grains and precious metal prices make their yearly lows or highs around this time, or when Mars goes direct. You see, that's the common thing that we see in the past. When Mars turns directions, like goes retrograde or direct, oftentimes precious metals will make their highs or low of the year. So we have to watch out for that.
Okay, but I have one more constellation slide here, or two more, because we're still not done with the outstanding aspect by that time, right?
Well, yeah, because on May 26th, Jupiter is going to make its third and final passage in its square to Saturn. Now, in addition to what I just talked about before with that aspect, it can coincide with renewed fears of recession, problems with selecting the next Supreme Court justice, and maybe obstacles with trade agreements. Now, given that Saturn is in Sagittarius, this time may represent a real test, maybe the first real test of the USA-Iran nuclear agreement, because Saturn in Sagittarius also represents struggles with religion, ideologies, and leaders who govern by strong religious ideologies.
Wow. Looks as if we have to, be alert about all these things. And is there a kind of a closing to all this series of serious constellations?
Well, that's the good news. I mean, this whole phenomenal period of March through June peaks with around June 13th to 17th, when Saturn makes its second passage of its square to Neptune. Now, 4 days earlier on June 13th, Neptune turns retrograde. So again, here you get Saturn square Neptune, just like you had Jupiter square Saturn, followed by one of the planets involved turning retrograde. In this case, it's Neptune. Now, the 36-year cycle of the waning square between Saturn and Neptune is very important to financial markets, especially interest rate related markets and crude oil. And this we discuss in our Forecast 2016 book and the webinar. But just consider the previous waning square between Saturn and Neptune 36 years ago was September of 1979 to June of 1980. Back then, interest rates rose, inflation in precious metals rose dramatically. You're starting to see a similar replay, at least in terms of precious metals, and you may see food prices rise dramatically too. And if that happens, then you're going to see inflation start to rise, and with that, of course, will come interest rate increases.
So, and I'm talking about financial markets, how can these aspects manifest in the financial markets and world affairs?
Well, we got to break it down into different parts. First of all, Jupiter is opposite Neptune as part of that T-square. And whenever you get Jupiter and Neptune together, you get exaggerated hysteria, euphoria. People are very hopeful because all of a sudden things look like they're going up. But then Saturn's right between them, making a T-square. And as optimistic as Jupiter can be, as euphoric as Jupiter can be, Saturn can be the opposite. It can represent a time of contraction, worries, and together with Jupiter and Neptune, it can be hysteria and panic. So we're likely to see things happening, going back and forth between optimism and markets go up, followed by pessimism and worry, and markets go down. It's a very volatile time, and that's the nature of mutable signs, and this is a mutable T-square. But investors should realize something. If panic and hysteria come into play, which they do every couple weeks during this time, it will coincide with falling stock prices, but that's just an opportunity to purchase assets at a very good price. It could also represent a good buying opportunity for certain commodities, because when prices fall, fear is high, and people want to sell cheap. And that can be a good opportunity to invest for the longer term.
Ray, where can people find out more about your ideas?
They can find out more by going to our website at www.mmacycles.com, or our European German translated website at www.mma-europe.ch, or they can subscribe to my newsletters. I have a daily report, a weekly report, a monthly report, where I cover my analysis of the stock market indices, gold, silver, treasury markets, currencies, crude oil, and that's how they can keep up with these ideas that I have, and especially important now between March and June of 2016.
Thank you. That's great. And
Thank you.
If you want to know more about the effects of the constellations on your own chart and your own life, you can, of course, book a reading with me about your personal chart and contact me through email or my website at www.antonialangsdorf.com, or mainly under info@antonialangsdorf.com, or call me on my client's telephone. Yes, Ray, but we're not done yet. We're almost done, but we have to announce our next video, because we will be keep talking about the incredible planetary lineup of spring 2016, because I think people want to know who is affected. I mean, we have birth data. We can tell people who has to look up for it, and how they can use the aspects constructively. And we will discuss many charts of world leaders and countries right into the focus of the cosmic energy. So stay tuned.
Yes, let's do that again. I'll look forward to that, Antonia.
Okay, thank you for this time, Ray. Have a good time.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye.